Good morning, good afternoon, happy Thursday. Welcome to another edition of Let's Build Your Audience in HubSpot with Joshua Oakes. 1 week away from Thanksgiving, man. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. We observe Thanksgiving, but it's not that big a deal around here because my kids have moved out. So we make a small plan and don't bring everybody. Don't have a huge gathering, fortunately.
Yep, I'm feeling that too. Um, uh, but yeah, the month, the year has gone by so fast. Can't believe we're at the end of November already. But it's been a super fun series, kind of building into this let's use HubSpot the way it was meant to be used, getting all the functionality, doing less manual work because we've built up from marketing and sales and customers, and we've turned the corner to kind of, okay, we've got some standard functionality understanding out of the
Yep.
way. Last time we were together, we started thinking about custom objects, customization, configuration of the portal to support better self-service experiences.
Yeah.
And today, we're gonna continue that journey.
Yeah. We're going to do a little deeper dive on some of that, those kinds of interactions that can support self-serve, and it's worth looking back into the early days of CRM and HubSpot in the internet era to think about HubSpot's, particularly if you're on the free tools or the starter level tools, you get access to contacts, companies, deals, you know, tickets, service pipelines, that kind of thing. And um, those, what we'll call them objects in the HubSpot terminology, do really harken back to like a fairly regimented understanding of how a sales process works and how a company's relationships with its customers work. And we are obviously not in the same kind of sales era as we were, even I would say even 5 years ago, or certainly not 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, or in the early days of databases full of customers. Um, and the combination of self-directed buyers and self-service interactions before somebody even kind of raises their hand to enter into the early stages of a purchase process, um, as well as the even in a self-service era, some purchase decisions kind of getting more complicated puts stress on any CRM, whether it's HubSpot or Salesforce or your Google Sheets, quote unquote CRM, um, for like interactions that kind of happen outside of semi-permanent dimensions that belong on a contact record or on a company record, or transitory purchase decision properties that get added to a deal, right? Like if you get a lead who is generally a contact associated with a company in a B2B sale, and then you've identified an opportunity and you create a deal, then your anticipated close date and the line items or the total value of that opportunity are on the deal, and that's how you report on it and project it and track that it's closed and report on revenue. And the company firmographics, even the domain name, the name of the company, where it's incorporated, number of employees, industry is all captured on the company, and that makes sense. And then your contacts, whatever job title, seniority, contact information is on the contact record. But we have a lot of interactions, many businesses have a lot of interactions that are somewhere between an inquiry form and a final purchase that don't really fit in that context. And that's one of the reasons that when I work with companies who have interactions like that, we go into this custom object territory, right? And uh, as we discussed last week, and you know what, I might as well, I'll pull up our diagram here. There's a simpler and a more planning oriented version of this diagram, but we're going to talk about this one real quick. We're talking about interactive experiences and custom objects in a left to right representation of how um, a customer journey, let's call it, progresses through, and the tools that you might use to support that journey. And you know, the self-directed aspect of this experience, it really can extend all the way into qualify even here. But when we have these experiences, and actually let's we talked about this last week, that you know, scenarios where you might have a custom object that you want to use to collect this information about a prospect and or company and or that might lead into an opportunity or a deal. We have all of these kinds of tools that are more contemporary tools, and that lead into kind of non-purchase flows that uh, nonetheless help people through that decision or through self-qualification, or sometimes they're like little diversions that are necessary on the way to making a purchase. And there's all kinds of technical ways here that we can talk about to handle it, but we're going to talk about specifically today a both like an archetype for these kinds of interactions, which is I call an application, some as well as the specific like application. There are a lot of businesses that have something that they call an application, right? Like some of our examples here, you apply to be part of a mastermind program, you apply to be in the reseller, an affiliate program, or an influencer program, or you apply, they're common in franchises, you apply to be considered for a franchise agreement. All of these are examples where a prospect, or let's say, let's go it this way, the company trying to acquire um, uh, customers or participants in programs, that kind of thing, have something that happens. You know, you might collect contact information either via prospecting or via an inquiry form or an ad that establishes an initial touch point with a prospect, but you don't reach out as a rep or an SDR. Um, but then you have some things that have to happen before this opportunity, whether it's actually a deal or an acceptance, is in a won or an accepted state. And the old way would be dump a bunch of properties on the contact, and then put another form in front of them, and then they submit that form. Your contact gets gunked up with all of these properties. It becomes super challenging to report on. It becomes super challenging to manage the process of like review of those submissions, and it becomes challenging to like act on them. So
Yeah. And if we
go
could,
ahead.
I'd love to double click on that, because I think
Yeah.
the original diagram, if we go back to that, just imagine the part on the bottom where we're like, the understanding of the customer grows and grows and grows. And what we're saying here is the more like you generate that context within HubSpot, the more you try to do it on a single record or a single object type, right? This is where we get to like the endless scrolling and just, I got to do all this work that really like creates context switching, because now I was looking over here, now I'm looking over here, and I forgot what I was going to do. Why did I even come over here to find this context? Creating this other space via custom objects starts to help you manage all this context, because you know it's valuable, but trying to do it on a single contact record or a single company record just gets very, very, you know, burdensome and overwhelming very quickly. And sometimes it can be a very simple custom object with just 5 properties on it that all of a sudden relieves just all this. It's like, oh, okay, now I can put it over here. It's always in a place where I can understand what's going on, not to mention reporting and dashboard help. So that's kind of what, it's why it's really important to understand, at which point in the process, what makes sense to separate. And for me, it helps like, okay, is there a thing involved where it has to move through a staging gate process? It's like if you
Yes.
can think about it in that way, then it's like, okay, we need pipelines, and very hard to represent that movement of process in in other ways in HubSpot,
Yeah.
right? We want to
Yeah.
avoid situations where it's like, okay, lead status, okay, select from a drop down. Right, I have no idea. Yeah, it's not good context. So that's what we're
Yeah.
describing here today.
Yeah. And the magic of custom objects in HubSpot, I would describe them, even though I would kind of describe them as they're very sophisticated and powerful. I would say that they're really at the beginning of the ramp of that sophistication and power. But right now, you can, custom objects, that for, a lot of organizations, they're behind a pricing gate. But the power of a custom object is they can be created to be simple if you just need like a snapshot of some basic properties that have a relationship to other things in HubSpot, like contacts or companies. But they can also be created to be sophisticated and like, as you said, have a pipeline like a deal does, right? And the number of organizations that I've talked to that have used deals to represent project management is, I mean, it's got to represent like 75% of the companies that I end up talking to, right? Because it was the only way to do something like that for a long time, or it's not super easy for a company who has Pro, like Sales and Marketing Pro, and even like Content Hub Pro, to realize like, oh, we are building something that's a process. um, we should look into custom objects. Like that's not super discoverable. That's why you would hopefully watch a video like this, or talk to a HubSpot coach who kind of understands the ramifications of that. Um, so you can go simple to complex and evolve, as your needs evolve or as you identify needs, right? So, I talk about this, the when to use a custom object, particularly in this archetype of like an application. And if you've never worked in a business or with a business that has something like an application process, a good parallel, I wouldn't recommend uh, uh, an education institution actually do this, but if you want to like put yourself in a headspace for thinking through this, and you can't identify one of these in your businesses, think about applying to college, right? Where you fill out a form or go on their website and say, send me information about your university. And then you get flooded with email and postcards and catalogs and Facebook ads. And and then at some point you might decide to submit an application, and then ultimately you might also submit a financial aid application and an honors application, or whatever. Um, that that second touch point here is kind of what we're thinking about when there's a parallel like that, right? And so the uh, there's not a hard and fast rule for like, here's when you should use a custom object versus put some properties on contact and have them submit an additional form. But some solid guidelines are, if you have like a rigorous acceptance, either criteria or process for that touch point in your business. If you have any sort of like advanced qualification criteria that you have to deduce that are not simplistic, like there are a number of decisions out there that might require like a skills assessment or personality assessment, or some kind of like in the example of franchises, net worth, right? You have to meet these minimum requirements to be able to sustain starting a business. If you have like with I've seen this regularly with mastermind or coaching programs, that kind of thing. You have to be placed with the right coach or group, right? Those are all examples of processes where there's definitely more than two steps, right? And that's where a custom object pipeline would come into play. We'll look at one in a second to help illustrate that. Or in a scenario where you might submit that more than once, either more than one person at a company, or you might submit it now and then reapply later, right? Or you might be resubmitting, like in a coaching or a mastermind program, you might be resubmitting for each cohort, right? And tracking progress. And then these all have some reflection, but another critical way to do it that I didn't capture here is what reporting on these things looks like in your organization. If you just want to say, how many leads did we get? Then like you're going to report on contacts and deals. But if you say how many people applied for, like cohort X or the program Y, you can't get reporting like that effectively out of um, contacts or companies. You can if you spam your system with deals every time somebody submits a form. But the right way to do it is with custom objects, because you get their name, you market to them, you engage with them, they submit the application, it gets associated with their contact. And then if they get accepted, then they actually become an opportunity, or we log the transaction, right?
Yeah. And like you mentioned, like the ways that I see people get creative, and props to them for using the tools that you have and figuring out ways to manage this stuff without custom objects. It's either like these 20 stage long deal pipelines, because it's common, right? Like, oh, sales rep is supposed to reach out about this. Oh, have they done this thing yet? Oh, that's for this with this other team. Like, have they filled out the application yet? Was it accepted? It actually happens with, like applying for credit when companies want to do purchase
Mhm.
orders,
Yeah.
right? It happens a lot. And that's where you start interacting with accounting. And do you want accounting coming in to look at your sales pipeline deals? Like, maybe not. Or we're getting creative with tickets, or we're getting super creative with these date stamp properties on the contact record, because we sell 3 different courses and we would love for the same contact to apply to all 3 over the course of their life.
Right. Yeah.
And most of the time it's like, oh, we can only report on the last time they did it, right? Unless we're creating this sophisticated set of fields where now we've got date. It's just a mess, right?
It's a mess, yeah, and I mean, the thing that I see, so often is in that scenario is you create a form or 3, right, for each of those sequential, enrollments or, like, gated, engagements. You can't go on to 201 until you do 101. Is you're asking similar questions, and so you reuse the property, and so they get overwritten. But unless you are super diligent about clearing those properties and resetting them and monitoring the required status of each of those and which apply to which course, you end up with this hodgepodge of values that where one of them in the list is going to be from the first time they submitted it, but this is the third time, right? For the third form, or they reapplied again, and some of the values are mixed from the past submissions. And when you do an application like you would with a college application, like, right, I'm submitting it right now. Here's what my GPA was. Here's what my, um, degree that I'm interested is. And if I reapply for a different program, right, like some of that data is going to be the same, but I'm going to capture it so that I have these snapshots, right? And if I look at the applications associated with a contact. I have the history. Here's when they submitted the first one. Here's the second one. I can see the values over time. There isn't any crosstalk or confusion, any mess, and I can report on those all distinctly, right? So much cleaner, so much better visibility for you as a business into what's going on.
Yeah. And those messes are what leads to, poor adoption. And then you can't report on anything at the end of the day because the data
Yeah.
just isn't clean enough. And like close one percentages don't mean anything because you got a bunch of purchasing process or a bunch of other process in here. Or you've created a separate deal pipeline to manage that. And now whenever you do deal reporting, you got to remove that pipeline from the report. There's
Yeah.
just there's a reason why I'd love to start with people like, okay, deals are meant for sales management. Is the thing you're trying to do with this deal pipeline sales management? If
Right.
not, let's not do it with deals,
Yes.
right?
Is there does it represent a revenue, first of all? And B, when it reaches its completed stage, does that exactly correlate with realized revenue, right? That's probably a deal if there are no diversions along the way. Like you could say, like, oh, well, if they apply for the mastermind or whatever, which is the example we're going to get into, if they apply for the mastermind when we accept the application, then, that is revenue. It's like, okay, but no, because we have to accept them, then they have to pay, right?
They have to pay.
Um, and so like
Right.
your a like application, depending on how you set things up, and there's a million ways to do it. An application can be a stage of your deal pipeline, or you don't create the opportunity until they're accepted, because then you are nurturing them into enrollment, and that deal is what represents the revenue. So that is the sales process, right? And an application is is a supporting interaction, so we don't put it on a deal.
Yeah, that's a good point because a lot of what we're talking about when you have these prerequisites required to get to the money and you have it all together in one spot, like, and then you go report it, you go find like, oh, why are these things stalled? It's because, oh, I sent an email to this department to ask about progress and they never got back to me because they were out that day and I just didn't remember to ask again. And
Right.
all these things where we're calling, like, it's one of the easiest places to spot for improvement in businesses when you start to use systems like this. Like if you got to call another department to understand status of
Right.
information that is in some system somewhere, like, and
Yeah.
that's the part that people like, oh man, all the gray areas in business, all the you know, friction between teams and like why do I always have to answer the sales guy's call and I don't understand why it's so important for them to know this information when in reality they need it to close the deal and
Right.
their livelihood depends on it. And it's just when you bring it into a system effectively, it starts to remove all of this personal friction that can get in the way of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, and we're going to look at an example where the application is a self-directed. Let's pull our diagram back up here, where the application process is self-directed. So the prospect submits the application as a hub in the form of a HubSpot form. The advantage to a custom object is, or one of the advantages, is that you can implement it that way, and you have to know some tips and fine print, which we will hopefully have time to get to. But you can also create a custom object using an internal form in the same in HubSpot. In the same way that you would create a deal, right? Like if you're qualifying a prospect, and you're like, okay, I think there's an opportunity here. You hit create deal, you type in the fields that have been identified as required on the create deal form, you hit create. You can do applications, custom objects and applications as one use case, the same way. So you can have you can have both of those paths for people, right? Like if you have a high touch audience where you are like, we're going to talk about a mastermind as the example. Let's say you've got a rep whose sole focus is direct one-on-one outreach and relationship with CEOs who are not going to go fill out a form. And then you have a go-to-market function that is targeting directors and VPs. They are much more likely to do a self-serve form kind of thing than a high-powered CEO who, if they were going to do it, they would have given it to an assistant anyway, right? Um, the So you aren't it doesn't kind of pigeonhole you into a certain flow or use case in the same way that storing all of this, like if you accept companies as part of your flow, good luck, right? Like you're going to have multiple people that might need to be involved in getting that data submitted. So are you going to like have a form where, oh, purchasing fills out this and, whatever their partner program person fills out this form, or they fill out both forms and it again gunks up the data versus, um, having it be able to route that. And if multiple actors in the same company fill out, the form, that's great. You associate it with the company, and it's all right there and visible, and you don't have any of that. Like, well, where did this value come from that you have to chase down and figure out? We should, in the name of time, move on. Although talking about, like the overall flow here, if you're doing like an application interaction with a custom object, is you got to set up the custom object. But what we're going to talk about here is um, allowing a prospect to submit the HubSpot form, which creates a custom object record, in this case, an application. Um, we enroll it in a workflow dedicated to, this is how I generally recommend it. I found this to be the most successful all the times that I've done it, is have like a workflow that handles the application or the custom object upon immediate creation, which drops it into the custom object pipeline that we've built. And then from there, you can execute the process. This is that pipeline to show an example. It looks a lot, as we've already intimated, like a deal pipeline, right? We've got our name stages. The cards look like deal cards, and then you can work your process from there, right? Um, the Particularly along the way, I didn't call this out, but the this allows you to also use it as an intake form if the contact if this is the first touch point, um, it acts as an inquiry form in that sense, creates the contact if it's new, and updates the contact if it's an existing contact in your HubSpot. And there's a lot of other stuff we may or may not have time to drill down into, but with a custom object like this, you can do applying association labels. You can assign owners to the objects. You can then use that to enroll either the object or the contact associated with it in follow-up communications, both immediate notification and as the object progresses. And you can build lists off of all of these things. They for the most part, act exactly like a contact or a company would if you are accustomed to working with those objects in HubSpot.
Yeah. And like, this is why we talk about the difference between HubSpot of old and HubSpot right now. Like, if you're still thinking that this is just a sales CRM or a marketing tool, it's just not. And like, once you can unlock this as a communication management system, right, you start to understand why. Like, of course, you need to know about these contacts and about these things that the contacts are doing, either from a a new sales prospect perspective, or just renewal and retention. We hear about that all the time. So of course you want this stuff in the system. It's much easier than most people think, but again, we have to start with mapping your process, understanding the data flow, understanding what action are you going to take when this application moves. And this is where, like, why this came to mind is when you approach it and it's sold as a sales CRM, let's say, like, okay, who's in charge of the sales CRM? All right, sales manager. Okay, they're the only people involved in onboarding and putting the system together. Meanwhile, this
Yeah.
application process is owned by this other team, yet we're not going to include them in the conversation of how we're going to build it out in HubSpot.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a problem with that every single time. Like, you never get away with that. I tried to be the marketing guy that just comes in and like, oh, I'll fix all the processes and we'll just get them in there and deliver HubSpot and everybody's going to use it.
Yeah.
Doesn't work that way.
It does not. Yeah. And it's, I mean, it is still flabbergasting that it's, we're at the end, we're at the end of 2024. We're almost at the end of Q4 of 2024. And I still hear people say like, well, HubSpot's just like a marketing email tool, right? It's like, oof. I mean, yeah, not just, but yes, you can send
Yeah.
marketing email if that's what you're asking. Um, it's a lot more than that, and like that mindset and like knowledge gap for sure inhibits companies from like getting the most value out of HubSpot. I mean that and aside from 75% of companies I run into having implemented some form of like project management process using a deal pipeline. The other thing that I get asked, uh, it's maybe the number one thing that I hear is like, are we getting everything out of our HubSpot experience? Should we upgrade? You know, and uh, and my answer is usually like, look, you aren't even getting the value. You shouldn't upgrade yet because you aren't even doing the fundamentals with the subscription you have. You're listening to all these people saying like, oh, you should add service. And it's like, look, you have a 20% dupe rate. We have a lot of things to fix before we start adding
Yes.
more hubs in. But you know, uh, the like partnership side of the org, processing applications in a separate system, disconnected from sales and marketing, who often are the people who like bring who run the go to market and bring the prospects or the leads for those, you know. Uh, Getting everybody understanding, that HubSpot can handle these things, um, and cut down on that uh, integration friction and switching friction and all that stuff involved. Uh, is that mindset and knowledge gap is like, you know, harms a lot of organizations, costs a lot of opportunities and friction. Um,
Yeah.
seeing that these things are possible super valuable for people.
And in most cases, we're not trying to replace these other systems. We're simply creating a place for the data in those other systems so we don't have to call each other up. We don't have to say, oh, it's protected over here and you don't have access, so you got to call this person. Or, oh yeah, we'll get a license for you. Yeah,
Right.
we'll set you up. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Now I got to log into another system that I've never used before and it's very cumbersome. And I'm just not going to do that. So now I'm still calling you. Now we're wasting money on your license. That happens with ERPs all the damn
Oh, yeah.
time. And it's been amazing to understand, like, oh, SaaS manufacturers, they don't really think about that stuff. And it's just like, hey, let's get everybody in. It's easy to think that they just want more money and want more people to buy more licenses, but literally it's just like until you're in the shoes of somebody that has to log into multiple systems, it doesn't matter how easy it is. If it's an
Right.
extra system, I'm just not going to do it. And I'm going to use a lot of other harder mechanisms to get the information. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be
I
that
mean,
way.
the other aspect of that too is like, I mean, I tend to hear in my engagements, I think, more frequently the desire to replace some of the external systems, and that's because of the kind of companies that I work with versus, the ones that you've worked with. There's an obvious distinction there. Like, I don't work with manufacturers or industrial, for example, where some external systems, are so like use case and industry specific that it wouldn't make sense. But I work with enough companies that are like, we have this external thing. It's not expensive, but it's a real pain in the ass. And our reporting is like because we have all of these systems, we key our reporting manually, or all of our reporting is for one silo is here, for another one it's in HubSpot, and for this other one it's over here because we can't get it anywhere else. And so we don't have the single pane of glass reporting, and we can't even kind of get it in one place. And that creates, there's a mismatch in numbers or manual entry error, or just like frustration of like, I have to wait for this division to compile their numbers to even look, which means that we're not going to do it on a weekly basis. And it takes a week after the end of the month to even get a monthly basis versus these systems all working together. And I often find that an external system that's used by one or two people that can be replicated 80/20 inside of HubSpot is a better solution for companies until they reach the enterprise scale and they could build whatever, kind of custom system they want. So, like, moving these things into HubSpot, a process like this, ultimately, even if it's not a perfect fit or replacement, we can either mirror it close enough, or if it's an external, spreadsheet system, we can absolutely mirror it with more power and sophistication, right?
Yeah. And like, not to belabor the point, but I'm definitely going to belabor the point. Like, uh, the baggage related to all the things we're talking about, like, it doesn't matter. You can't just show this to somebody like, oh, here's an object. Oh, of course you're going to create it. Why wouldn't you? It's right next to this
Right.
thing and that thing, and now everything gets easier. Like, uh, the change management and the understanding, and it's not mine versus yours. It's us working together. Like, when you're in like like, it's so common. We have Microsoft 365, the whole suite. We have a very expensive ERP system. We have HubSpot. We have Salesforce. We have ADP. These systems that almost by themselves could handle most of the things that a business needs to survive and do business, albeit different experiences in different places. Yet we still have the big boss having to manually create 160 slides to do the monthly report, and he's
Yeah.
getting half those slides from all his managers. It's like, guys, and then we have these questions. Well, can we do this? We have the highest class systems that we're paying for. We can do whatever we want with
Yeah.
any of these systems, literally. So don't bring another system, and don't suggest that, it's
Yeah.
these human based challenges that we have to learn how to deal with. And so getting good at talking about these things in a way that's can affect it, because this bottom line is, if you want a unified view of the customer, there is no better system to
Yeah.
execute that in than HubSpot.
Yeah.
um and that's why we're here, like, doing this work.
Yeah. And so that one of the reasons I put all of this mock-up together we're going to walk through, and is that maybe I'll clarify this in a second, is that the human aspect of like getting that drill down, the number of leaders that I've sat down with and say like, okay, what's your process? What do we need to build? to support your process and do the at the same time, I'm looking at how do we make sure that we are not just throwing away our understanding the customer as we build, is the getting them to show me what they are doing in their mix of systems, and then go pilot it in HubSpot, right? And if you don't know that you can pilot so many things like this with a custom object and say like, hey, you showed me your application process. I heard, here's your pain points and friction in trying to do this. And here's where I see that we have all of these gaps, right? Like we'll look at some of the things on these applications in a second that can serve as like customer understanding examples. And you can mock up, like, here's what it would look like if we did your application in HubSpot, because, seeing is A, believing, and B, the path to understanding for these kinds of things. If you're dealing with a stakeholder who's like, the marketing team talks about HubSpot all the time, but I don't know what that even is really, right? I can't even log in, right? I don't have an account or whatever. You need to be able to show them that, right? And so just to show, if you've never worked with a custom object before, we're looking at properties here in the same way that you might go look at deal properties or contact properties. Our custom object is an application in this case. And in this sense, and this configuration of it operates in HubSpot like a deal. I've created a pipeline for it, which we were just looking at. And it's one object application. It can have many different types. Like we could use the same object if we have like a mastermind application. And let's say we have a like some kind of working group project or something where leaders come in and do a like cohort based, learning thing that's separate from the mastermind. You don't have to have a separate deal object in HubSpot just because you have like product and services sales, or you have different pipelines for different like types of sales processes. You can, in the same way that you can use deals regardless of your sales process, you just create different pipelines. And people can work in the pipelines that are relevant to their segment, or however you're structuring your sales process. Custom objects operate the same way, right? We have shared properties for all of the records that are within the one object. So like in our example here, we have an application type and there's only one so far. When I build these out, the many times I always create an application type, because it is typically not very long before you built one of these where somebody says like, oh, you know what, Sam over there has something like this. Could they use that? And I'm like, actually, I've already built it on the assumption that yes, they are going to. And so you don't need a custom object type for every one of these kinds of interactions. You just need to like think ahead about what are the properties that these things share. And if they are super different, then yeah, you can create different custom objects. But all but the most complicated businesses can, typically get away with a couple if you're just talking about these kind of like application and self-directed buyer sort of interactions. And you define these like you would anything else, right? Like you need to know, okay, what are the properties that we need when we create, when we're thinking about the pipeline, or the process, what are the stages, right? For our mastermind example here, you get a new application, qualify them, you check the references, you place them with the group. When they're done, they're placed, or you maybe disqualify them and decline their application. When you're creating an object, here's one of the things that you need to know if you're doing this the first time. Let's go into settings. It's super easy to create a custom object. There's a button right there. But because it's completely custom and it makes no assumptions about what you're trying to do, you need to create the associations, right? A deal, the first time you power on HubSpot, deals have an inherent association with companies, for example. HubSpot makes no assumptions about that when you're constructing your custom objects. So if it could be related to companies, contacts, or deals, like in this case, when an application accepted, we might associate it with the deal, and that sees the transaction over the line. You've got to create these associations here, and we'll see why when we talk about the form in a second. But yeah, and then you also have the association labels. Like if we look at contacts, we just have the association label so that a contact is associated with an application as an applicant. Just to make it clear, you could have additional ones, co-applicant. You could attach in our like reference checks, right? Like maybe you want to have other contacts associated with it. And have reference be the association label. And the let's go back, let's talk about pipelines. We might as well. So we create a pipeline for the object, and just like with deals, here's where if we had another kind of application that we wanted to create, we can create an additional pipeline. And just like deals, you build out your stages. They don't have a close percentage. That's one difference, and it's why revenue doesn't belong here typically. And you just have open and closed stages, but you can set conditional stage properties and pipeline rules like like a deal pipeline, right? The one thing that's just another tip in passing here is custom objects in the same way that deals, deals are for revenue. There's the inherent concept in a deal of closed won versus lost. Custom objects don't have that. And since you're building your own, you get to describe that status and relationship yourself for your needs, right? So if you need a like closed status for an application, then you create a property for that. And if you need a like an equivalent of won versus lost, then you can create a property for that. But you can also you can also rely on your stages as well, right? Like if you have a status closed and it's in the placed stage of your custom object pipeline, that's a functionally, in this case, a closed one. And if it's in a closed status and in decline, then that's a closed lost, right? You can mirror that with properties if you need to, but you can also just use those relationships.
Can you click on one of those code icons for a second?
Sorry, click on what?
The code icon. I don't know what else to call it. Yeah. So just to show this, like, so often we think we can't do this stuff because it's super complicated, and like this is where HubSpot, you can leverage HubSpot's ability to see this stuff very easily to say, okay, we built the pipeline over here. This is exactly the data that I need from the other system. This is where it exists. Here's the internal IDs of where it needs to be set up. This stuff, like when we start talking about open APIs and how to integrate systems, like non-developers can very easily get to the information needed that can give developers who are maybe outside of HubSpot, that are seeing HubSpot from a very different perspective. They're not in your HubSpot. They're just looking at APIs and internal IDs. This makes it insanely easy to give them the information they need to do these integrations for you.
Yeah. Yep. It's all directly available here. And of course, you can also give your devs access and they can see it as well. But all that stuff is, if you do this on your default sales pipeline, these will be called things like, I change them so often that I don't remember that, these on the default sales pipeline, these all have human readable, all lowercase, no space, descriptions that correspond with the default name of the pipeline.
Yep.
But your properties, let's go back to setup so I can jump quickly over to our properties. But don't be intimidated by custom objects. Any of them behave just like the properties on the first class native objects in HubSpot, right? The internal name, if you construct these and don't change them, the first time you create it, you type in a label, you hit save, it does a lowercase no space, uses underscores to create the internal name. So all of these values that if you're working with an integrator are going to be available, findable in exactly the same way as if you have run an integration against a contact in the past, right? And even if you're doing a no code like a Zapier, all of these things are available that way as well. If you have no other way to do it, you can create custom object records within HubSpot using Zapier. Super easy, just like you would and probably have done with contacts in the past, right? It's just a more powerful way to describe the data and relationships that object should have, right? The one catch that I will say is, in this case, I gave application title. This is the custom objects primary property. So it's the in its equivalent, like on a deal, is deal name, right? You can't create, and that you designate these at the time that you create the custom object configuration. You can't create a custom object record unless this primary property has a value. And so where I often see people try this, get frustrated, struggle to find any documentation or any history of anybody who has done this successfully and give up, is this property you need to uh, you designate it, as I said, when you create the custom object. You need to make sure that you check this show in forms, because this property is not checked. This visibility checkbox is not checked when you create the custom object. And that is what, again, we are talking about. We are talking about using a HubSpot form to create these object records as part of a self-service or a self-directed buying journey. That is what allows you to build a form like our mastermind application form here. Let's see what this looks like. So here's an example of how you might build a form like this. First name, last name, email, job title. How long have you been in your current role? What do you want most? How big is your company or division? What areas are you bringing to the table for our group? What areas do you want to grow in? There's some like checkbox. I understand that it's a pricey program, and that I'm going to dedicate my time. For a professional mastermind program, you might do a little bit of validation to understand how you would enable somebody to, if they want to expense it, but it isn't approved, you need to support them or provide some documentation to make that happen. Your target start date, and that property I just showed you, application title, is actually this signature field with applications. This is often a great way to do it, because I'm going to show you this config in a second. First of all, you need to set that value. This property needs to be set for a custom object to be created via form, and a signature. Again, we're talking about this archetype of an application as part of a purchase decision. People are used to like a digital signature, and we aren't going all the way to like you've got to sign a contract, with any digital signing platform in order to proceed. But it gives your application a little bit of air of like officiality and commitment. When I've made this suggestion, leaders all say like, "Oh, I love that. That's great." Like we want them to know that like we're paying attention and this matters. Um, and so like this is our preview, unstyled preview of a form. But if you have any form in your purchase decision that looks like this, you need a custom object for an application, right? Anything this robust. Um, so let's look at what that form looks like real quick. As of the time of our recording, you can't get custom object properties in HubSpot's new emerging form builder. It's only available in the legacy form builder. Maybe by the time you watch this, that will have taken care of itself. But it's built like any other form. We have our properties down here, and here's our applications properties. You can see I've already added a bunch of them. But first name, last name, email, job title are fairly permanent properties that we would want associated with the contact. Our contact properties on this form, and our application-oriented snapshot specific to the custom object interaction are seamlessly visible on the form. Here's what they look like rendered as properties from the custom object. And as you can see here, here's our application title that we looked at before. It's required because the custom object won't get created if they don't submit it. And we can even do things like we do on any other form. Like I'm presetting the application type to mastermind participant, but I've got that field hidden just like you would do on any inquiry form where you're presetting like an interest field or something like that. And it gives us a form that behaves now that we've enabled that primary property on the form for forms on the property settings, and then added it and made it required. This form will behave like any other. That's what does these two steps here. A contact gets upserted, which means if it doesn't exist, it's created because we asked for email. If it does exist, it gets updated, and a custom object gets created, right? All those things we just talked through, that's what enables this to happen. And from there, we are operating on a custom object, and we are getting all the power of our self-built, self-configured pipeline, the process that it supports. But the records you can do and think about them pretty much like you would any other record in HubSpot, whether it's a contact or a deal, right? Or a company. If you have a contact submit an inquiry form, what's one of the first things that you're going to do? Well, you're probably going to enroll them in a workflow, check a couple of things, and then maybe send them an initial, thank you email or whatever. Well, you can do that with custom objects. Let me grab my, let's go to the right folder, mastermind application. So steal this workflow. You should do it for all your custom objects. You get this workflow type when you create a custom object. So this is a workflow for applications. And when an object is created, and remember we set that value of application type, I typically do this. I take the existing title, which is their signature/name, and I add the type, and in the case of something like a mastermind, the desired start date, which was a property of that form. And that's what, if we go back and look at those cards, we'll see that's what those get named. We set an application date. So we have a separate property from the create date of the object, because this supports the manual entry, where an object might be created, but the data was collected previously in the case of like a rep keying an application. We assign that to an owner who is going to act on it. We apply association labels, make the contact who's associated with an applicant. We drop it into the pipeline in a specific stage, right? And that is what gets us to go back out to our application. That gets us here, right? And then like deals, you can create, as we saw our configuration, you can see create required properties per stage. You can build workflows that operate against these at each given stage. And so, again,
Yeah.
like every other object, you can create cards, left hand, right hand configurations, and cards here for in the center column for these, right? So, like our example here is we want to score these applicants across a couple of dimensions. We want to know which strengths and growth areas they chose as we are working them through our pipeline process. And we've been going super long, so I'm going to show you one more thing really quickly, which is, I said how you think about and need to report on these activities, right? If at any point somebody who owns a business function that has an application like this is going to get asked, how many applications did you get? How many do we have for a particular program or cohort? The excuse me, custom objects can be reported on like any other record, right? We have 12 applications submitted this month. Here they are. This should look super familiar. Here's their pipeline stage. We have 8 that are open. We haven't placed anybody yet. We can look at dimensions like here's what our applicants identified as strengths. Here's our weak, where they want to grow. We have 8 of our applicants out of our 12 are interested in AI transformation. That's a good thing to know as we are pulling groups of them together or thinking about our curriculum. In this case of applications, closed lost equivalent, might be rejected applications, either because the prospect withdrew, finances, they couldn't get their expense approved, or we rejected one for a poor fit. Report on our average scores, etc. Right? So we have
Powerful
this
stuff.
whole process, and this you could not. You're gonna have to take my word for it. You could not create this level of visibility on contacts if you were doing it without investing dozens, 100+ hours cleaning the data up, getting it categorized, protecting the changes, and you can't get any of that, pipeline
Yep.
aspect
And
either.
and so many businesses out there have some kind of random form or random even PDF form that's being filled out with somebody. It's left to somebody else to hand key it in, and it just doesn't have to be that way. So this has been awesome, man. I appreciate you taking us through it. And if you're out there watching and you can think of these forms, or you can think of these data entry situations that happen, and it somehow managed to be manual process every time somebody touches this thing, find those opportunities and let's grow. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.